Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed, because Brian told me that we don't have enough time. But I'm very sorry that he has missed one important thing from my CV, and that's it. I'm a great fan of the Ethiopian Great Run, and I do that every year. And I know it's an international event, but many of our best runners in the continent attend. So I want to encourage you every November to be in Addis as well as another venue. Without further ado, and in the interest of time, I would want to add into the discussions that have been going on trends in the Horn of Africa on peace and security. And it would be remiss if we don't talk about the increasing expansion of issues of migration. And as has been put on the title, we'll be looking at emerging trends in the Horn of Africa, and we'll be specifically focusing on the cause of migration and free movement of people. I would like to urge colleagues, friends here, to focus on migration alone, because in terms of movement of people, it has been well covered when we're talking about the economic integrations, both on the sidelines events yesterday and today. So I want to give you a little bit of background so that we can frame our discussion. In doing so, I would like to note that migration has been there since humanity. We cite a number of big migratory movements in the world, and one of them being the human race itself appeared in the continent of Africa and migrated to the rest of the world. It can be argued, but this is one of the things that we get in our literatures. The second point is the great migratory movement from the Mediterranean to the Americas. And also, it will be, again, remiss not to mention that one of the largest movements of people happened during the slave trade that happened few centuries back. And the migratory movements, the natural course of humanity, has been framed recently by a number of international approaches, but we know that the African Union, the United Nations could be cited for this. The African Union, as you all know, has dedicated this year for its team, the African Union's team, for the issue of migration and related issues. And we all know that late last year, the Global Compact of Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration was adopted in Marrakesh, and it has come with a number of recommendations on how to manage this issue, which has both faces, as you know, challenges and opportunities. The causes of migration, I asked my friends who are experts in migration, is mainly two-folded. One is the initial point I mentioned to you. It is very inherent for people to like to move from where they are and discover. But the second one might be forced one, which could be related to climate change, could be related to politics or economics. And I also learned that the cause of migration could be of inherent in nature, as I mentioned, but the definition has not been agreed globally. We have a working definition, as I have been advised by my sister Maureen, should be contributing very positively, the director for the IOM in Ethiopia. There is a working definition by the United Nations Development Agency, and which is also agreed by the IOM and at large. I'll give you three pieces on this. The first one talks generally about what migration means, and migration is a migrant is any person who's moving or has moved across an international border or within a state away from her habitual place of residence, regardless of, number one, the person's legal status, number two, whether the movement is voluntary or involuntary. The third one is what the causes for the movement. And the fourth one is what the length of the stay is. This is the general nature of migratory movement. But we can also look at migratory movement in two ways, as I have mentioned earlier. The first one is orderly migration. In orderly migration, we can see that the movement of a person from his or her usual place of residence to a new place of residence in keeping with the laws and regulations governing that manage exit of the country of origin and travel, or transit and entry into the destination of host country. When we talk about the other side of movement, which is forced migration, it is a migratory movement in which an element of coercion exists, including threats to life and livelihood, whether arising from natural or man-made causes. We could view the issue of smuggling and trafficking in persons as part of this category. The form of displacement has consequences for migrants and states' legal rights and obligations, which are important to consider in the context of development cooperation. Having said this, I would also like to note that in recent studies, there are many literatures that show us that in the continent, the movement of people in the form of migration is largely contained within us. We have heard from the studies from the ECA that more than 70% of the movement is within the continent. So what I would like to do now is that before I introduce our panelists, to frame our discussions today, the first point that I would want to allude to is what does the trend in migration in the Horn of Africa look like, and what are the international mechanisms that are supporting it? This will be the first chunk of our discussion, a food for thought for all of us. The second point is we say that migration has two impacts and two results. Those are that would create forced migration and challenges for both sending and receiving countries, but also there are dividends to be harnessed if migration is done in a very formal way. So I would want you and our panelists to engage in this direction. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my panelists and also introduce them to come to the podium. The first person I will be introducing will be His Excellency Mr. Zeynu Jemal. He's a State Minister for Peace currently, but I would say that he's a man of well-versed in migration issues in our country, and he has, among others, has worked as the head of the Refugees and Returnees Affairs Organization, heading that entity. Please, you're welcome. It's also my honor and privilege to invite Ambassador Morten Aasland. He is currently Ambassador Permanent Representative of the African Union to Norway, and he has his own experiences in terms of managing migration through his experience in the European Union. So he will be also another asset in our discussion. Ambassador, you are most welcome. Our third panelist will be Mr. Ashraf Nour. He is a director of the International Organization for Migration, and he has a wealth of experience serving in this process for 25 years. Welcome. I really like this group of panel because they're well-versed, and we have a very distinguished professor, Abdelwahab El-Affendi. He is Dean of the School of Social Sciences and Humanities and Professor of Politics in Doha Institute of Graduate Studies in Qatar. But this gentleman will impress us with a long list of experience. He was a journalist, he was a diplomat, and he has written extensively in many issues. So I'll welcome my panelists, and we'll directly go to discussions. Before I leave the floor to our discussants, I would like to set the rules. Each panelist will have 5 minutes to address the points that I have already mentioned in a linked manner or in any sequence you wish. And then after that, we'll give 15 minutes for the podium for them to comment or raise questions. And I'll give back the floor for each of the panelists to speak for 5 minutes in response. And I'll give myself 5 minutes to conclude. Thank you very much. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, brothers, friends, when I started out introducing our panelists, I started from the State Minister. I will run down and reverse the order in terms of intervention. So I'll ask my brother on my left side to begin. Thank you very much. On my right side, sorry.
Thank you very much. I was preparing myself to be the last speaker, but also right. I think if we look at, if we start with the definition of migration, which Her Excellency has put forward, I think most of us who are sitting in this room will be migrants of some sort, because all the workers at the African Union and the UN, and also myself are migrants. I am an unashamed economic migrant. I went to the UK in 1982 on an employment visa as a journalist. And it was a great experience, I think, for me and for the UK, because for the first 12 years or 15 years of my stay there, my salary was always coming from outside the UK. So my contribution to the UK economy and my contribution to whatever happened in the UK as a journalist, as a diplomat, as an academic was funded from abroad, and the UK was getting plus. But anyway, that's another thing. I think we should, to start with, distinguish between migration as an orderly, as we said, natural process internationally, which is happening a lot. And most of the states we live in, including, I'm currently living in Doha, but all the countries of the world has been formed by migrants. I mean, in the case of the UK, before me was the Anglo-Saxons and the Normans and the Scandinavians and all of these waves. So we have to start with this point, that migration shouldn't have a stigma about it. This is my first point. Migration is a natural process which benefits the world, but it's almost a natural process in the world. It's not the exception. The problem is when migration become either forced or irregular, and mainly because people have been targeted in their own homes. Nobody likes to leave his home. Let's put it this way. Everybody loves his home so much that people who live in deserts are still living in deserts, and they wouldn't, if you try to induce them to leave, to go, for example, to a nicer place, a greener place, they say, no, this is our home. We want to live here. Most of the people who have been forced now from Africa and from this region to travel abroad in clandestine ways have been forced to do that by circumstance. And sometimes circumstances which the international community has played a role in. The case of Somalia is a case in point. The case of Syria recently is a case in point. The whole international community was watching while people were bombed out of their homes. The least then we could do for them is to give them some way safe. The international community has been away. Sorry. I must repeat a bit. I said everybody loves to stay at home. Nobody leaves to leave. When I went to the UK in 1982, there were no Sudanese permanent residents in the UK except about 20 or 30 families. We used to meet in one home for a meal or for a reunion. Only later, from the 90s, we start to have a lot of refugees coming. Now, the trends, since we are speaking the trends currently in the Horn of Africa is actually people coming back home, not people leaving. Whether in Ethiopia, the former rebels, whether in Somalia, a lot of people who have been displaced because of the instability are coming home. In Sudan now, after the revolution, but even before the revolution, for example, in 2005, when the peace agreement was made, and the comprehensive peace agreement, lots of Sudanese who were in exile, came back home. And my own wife, for example, has been living in Sudan since 2004, working there as a professor, and so on and so on. Nowadays, but of course it all depends on how things move. If we starting to have conflict in areas, so we have a reversal. If the economy goes down, then we'll have a reversal. So I think, to sum what I wanted to say, that migration is natural, usually it should be orderly. When it isn't, then there's a big problem. Final point I want to make also about our region. We are discussing this morning very interesting things about the region itself, about the movement of the people within the region, and the multiple identities. For example, we had a guy who was the second man in the ruling party in Sudan, and a few years back, this guy was the head of the Eritrean Students Association somewhere. We have people, a friend of ours in the debate today said, for example, that in the border with Ethiopia, people, and I think in all the borders around Sudan, people don't differentiate between this country and the next. I think this is an asset for integration and for homogeneity in this region. For example, he said in Gondar, the immigration Sudanese officials, they don't live on the Sudanese side of the border. They live on the Ethiopian side of the border, which is also very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Now I'll give the floor to Dr. Ashraf, to Arun further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moderator. And I will zoom in on the topic and say that migration in the Horn is becoming increasingly complex because it involves more and more mixed migrants and not just IDPs and refugees. And as such, it has become very irregular in nature and is dominated by human trafficking and smuggling networks, which is a big concern. The regional mobility profile is very fluid, and not only that, it keeps changing by many factors, including environmental, humanitarian, security, and as a result, we see varied patterns of migration. Each one has different dynamics and different sets of pulls and factors that determine its outcome. The region is also prone to natural disasters. We heard some of that today in the morning. And not only that, climate change is negatively impacting many countries, and there is growing desertifications. And the sad side with growing desertifications that it develops a deadly side, which is represented by resource-based conflicts, which affects many of the countries in this region. I think the chair of the Tana Forum alluded to that in his presentation today. Looking at the mobility in the Horn, one can say that it has been strongly overshadowed by forced migration, which has, in a way, turned many countries in the region to be at the same time source, transit, but also destination countries, and it also involves a wide range of movements and categorizations of people on the move, including IDPs, refugees, asylum seekers, economic migrants, etc. But the interesting point about this, according to IOM estimates, at least 44% of the people who come out of the Horn, they start their journeys initially as IDPs, and then over time, they shift from one category to the other. Looking at the Horn, there is clearly a multiplicity of routes that migrants use to come out and go in different directions. The main three among them, and many of you are familiar with them in one way or the other, is the route that leads to North Africa, and from North Africa across the Mediterranean to Europe. The others not far from here to Djibouti, and from there across the Gulf of Aden into Yemen and beyond. And the third is the one that goes to Southern Africa via Malawi or Mozambique. One thing that is common among all these three routes, in a way that the scale of those who move is not small, so the volumes vary from one to the other. Complexities are also growing, and especially with increasing vulnerabilities that the migrants go through during the course of their journeys and the hazards that they are subjected to. But also there is growing human cost, and this is really very alarming. If we look at the figures since the beginning of the millennium, over 60,000 people, according to IOM estimates, lost their lives during hazardous migration journeys. From 2015, some 20,000 people. And if we look at Africa's share of that, is really of great concern, especially for our young people. The rest of the story you know, but I think the plea that I am making here is to say enough is enough for that, and we all need to do something about that. I could as well elaborate a little bit about the impact of population displacement in the region, and it affects almost every country, and the brunt of it is taken in the order of the numbers that they receive, and this is in a way also tested the generosity of these countries. Uganda, which has the highest number of refugees, Ethiopia, Sudan, Kenya, and South Sudan, despite the situations that they are in. And also this shows that the size of displacement of this region is not small. The figures that we and the UN has points to 3.2 million IDPs and 5.7 IDPs and 3.2 million refugees, so a total of 8.9 million. And if we look at the African figure, which as of this year is estimated to be around 20 million people displaced within the continent, including some 14 million IDPs and 6 million plus refugees. So that shows the share of this region compared to the rest of Africa is almost 40 to 45%. And it's the interesting part, and maybe the more important here, is not just the numbers and the scale of this phenomenon, but also the vulnerabilities that the people go through, especially for women, for children. There is growing concern. Gender-based violence is a big issue. Human trafficking and smuggling is another. And for children, many of them born within the fences of the IDPs and the language there for more than 20 years, they didn't see anything beyond the fences of the refugee camp. So certainly there are vulnerabilities and humanitarian issues that needs to be tackled. I stop here. Thank you
very much. Thank you first for being present at the Tana Forum, which is renowned for a very good reason as the forum on the continent. It's an honor to be here, Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. I mentioned a word earlier that I will repeat, the Norwegian word that I taught you, dugnad, which translates as somewhere in between Ujamaa and Harambe. little bit between both of them, and I think it wonderfully sums up something which is essential with the Tana Forum, because it is getting a group of people together to work together and to get somewhere jointly for something better. In other words, everybody gets to a better place afterwards, after that joint effort. I want to teach you one other word, if I may, and I'm sure many of you know it, and this is the word manel, M-A-N-E-L. Anybody knows the meaning of the word manel? Well, a manel, exactly, a manel is a panel made up only by men. Now I say this knowing that the Commissioner for Political Affairs should have been with us, and we are in the very able hands of the State Minister, who compensates for at least 4 men. But I still want to underline this, because one of the striking things that hits one when one comes to work with the African Union, which I have been doing only for 6 months, is the importance devoted to the promotion of women right through the organization and in all spheres. And that is fundamentally, many of us believe, one of the most, or perhaps the most important factor for moving Africa forward to the Africa that you want and that we want. One could say that migration is so much 2015 or so much 2016 or 2017. It's not really a topic for 2019. And there are reasons to say that, because migration was absolutely dominating the agenda a few years ago, certainly in Europe, as our Belgian colleague mentioned a moment ago. But I think there are at least 2 reasons for why migration still is an absolutely key issue that has to be addressed. The first one is that migration, and some of our colleagues here touched on this, really affects almost every issue of state and interstate relations. Sovereignty, asylum, security, development, social welfare, border governance, health, trade, tourism, remittances, transnational crimes, mobility, racism, discrimination and xenophobic attacks, integration and human rights issues. And this is quoted from the Tana Forum note. The other reason why migration is an issue that will stay with us and really has to be dealt with is that how we deal with migration on the continent of Europe will affect the continent of Africa. And how you deal with migration on the continent of Africa will affect the continent of Europe. Europe and Africa's destinies are shared in so many areas, as we know, but they're also shared in the area of migration. So both these things, I think, are strong arguments for retaining migration on the agenda and continuing a joint effort to develop migration governance. The last point I would make is highlighting, I think, the difference and what we have achieved between 2015 and today with regard to migration governments. And I will have a little bit of a Eurocentric perspective in saying this. What happened from August in 2015 is that irregular migration hit the European political debate, European societies, in an absolutely unprecedented way. More than 1 million people entered Europe and the Schengen area in an undocumented or informal manner. If any of us reach Borle Airport, we have to put down our passport, we have to look in the camera, and we have to put our finger down. But at this time in Europe, more than 1 million people crossed the border in an undocumented manner. This had, as we know, a very large effect on political debate in European countries. There was a lot of confusion and a lot of uninformed debate. And the unfortunate thing, as President Mahama of Ghana reminded us a moment ago, in an earlier session, that this migration influx in Europe, which in absolute terms was not so large, It coincided with the rise of the populist right, a weakened belief in multilateral institutions and the European Union, and had an effect, as we know, on elections across European countries. So in a sense, the migration advent in 2015 was a little bit of a political trauma for the European continent. I think that we have managed jointly to turn the corner on this between 2015 and 2019, and that is extremely important. The Global Compact on Migration has been agreed, negotiated and agreed, and finally blessed in Marrakesh. European-African cooperation is much, much stronger based on the Valletta Declaration, the Khartoum and Rabat process, and the achievements of that. And also the big scare factor that was very present in European politics has receded somewhat to the background, and that is important. I hasten to add that there are huge human and humanitarian issues that are still very pressing in the migration area, and our colleague from the IOM mentioned them in the Horn of Africa, very much so in Libya. And the work in this area is in no manner done, but I think it's important to establish that a significant degree of global governance on migration has taken place over these years, and we have moved forward.
We give the floor to Minister Zeynu now.
Thank you very much. First, I would like to comment on the trend. Of course, the trend especially of irregular migration in the Horn of Africa is in an increasing trend. Because the main drivers of the irregular migration or forced displacement are still not addressed. Conflict is there, poverty is there, underdevelopment is there. So actually these are major drivers, and unless we address effectively all those major drivers, we would not think of the decreasing trend of irregular migration. So this needs the commitment of, especially the commitment of leadership in creating inclusive political and economic institutions, so that to harness the talent and resources that the region have. So this is a key, actually. And of course, there is a need to establish, a need to set policies informed by research findings and anchored by whole government approach. And this is also very critical. The strategies that needs to address the problems of irregular migration should be in line with developmental approach and the developmental plan of the national developmental plan of specific countries, and at the same time, the region too. Unless and otherwise, we see the problem of irregular migration as a problem of development, we can get lost, definitely. So if we approach addressing the problem of irregular migration developmentally, definitely we can come up with effective solution. To do this, we need to have several interventions. Delivery of services should be enhanced, especially vocational training, so that they can match with the labor market and young men and women can be employed. And this is also one of the areas that needs to be, seriously worked. So in this regard, we might need to amend some of our legal frameworks, like Ethiopia has recently amended its refugee law so that it can be in line with the developmental plan of the country, the national development plan. Refugees can be part and parcel of the national development plan of the country, because so that to harness the positive aspect of the refugees and the displaced, forcibly displaced people, and of course returnees and potential migrants, irregular migrants. The other very important aspect that we need to intervene is enhancing coordination mechanisms between areas of origin, transit, and destination. We started recently with Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania, working closely on how to tackle the irregular migrations. And we signed, of course, an agreement focusing on victim protection and, of course, hunting of the traffickers and smugglers. This is very important to expand this cooperation to even with the EU. We have a program with the EU on the return, a 50 million project, actually to integrate the irregular migrants to Europe and bring them back to Ethiopia and integrate them with the community, and of course integrate them economically. So this is one of the areas that we really want to focus. Enhance socio-economic opportunities, especially for the youth who are highly exposed to the dangers of irregular migration. For instance, building industrial parks where portions of jobs will be committed to forcibly displaced persons, potential migrants, and returnees through designing and implementing programs like the Job Compact in Ethiopia is also another good intervention that can address the problems of irregular migration developmentally. Enhancing frequent awareness on the dangers of irregular migration is also one of the very important area that needs intervention. For instance, closely working with the media so that to create the necessary awareness is also another area. Increase humanitarian and development finance, technical assistance that supports to achieve sustainable return and reintegration. For instance, Ethiopia and EU launched a 50 million project, which is working very good actually. We have started integrating those who are returned from Europe, can easily be integrated into the community and economically, of course. So this is also one of the areas that I want to mention. I think that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, distinguished panelists. I would like to now give the floor to the audience and take one question from each side. It doesn't have to be necessarily a question. It can be a comment. But if you allow me, I would prefer for people to ask, but we have a very prominent person, at least in Ethiopia, that is helping the process of integration and helping refugees. And that is the head of the IOM in Ethiopia, Maureen. If Maureen is around, I would give her the last chance to speak. Are you around? Yes. Sure, great. Okay, now we'll take 3 points. I'll start from here. I see the ambassador of Mexico.
Thank you very much.
This side. Yourself. I'm sorry, just a minute. Let's conclude and then. Okay. Dr. Mahari. All right. Please, Ambassador.
Thank you, State Minister Hirut. The State Minister of Peace, the Minister of Peace, talk about social development. My question is the importance of the adoption of the Global Compact for Migration in Marrakesh to be integrated to the development plans in the Horn of Africa, and also the importance to change the role of migration with social development, with investment in social development in order to change the role of migration, not as an obligation, as an option. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go this direction.
Hello. Hi, my name is Aya Shebi. I am the African Union Commission Chairperson, Special Envoy on Youth. A long title, but I go with AU Youth Envoy. And in the spirit of the panel, I think I would invite the men on the panel to pledge publicly not to sit on panels in the future with only men. To have gender representation, 2 men, 2 male, 2 female, besides the moderator. I have 3 quick comments and 1 question. The first one is, we need to be able to articulate a story of hope for African youth. We have been very good at analyzing why young people migrate, or why they move, or why they leave their countries, you know, because of climate change, because of political reasons that need political solutions, because of study, economic opportunities, and so on. But have we been able to answer the question of why young people die in the Mediterranean? Why a 20 years old with a future ahead jump on an overcrowded boat knowingly that it will sink midway and pay the smuggler, pay for the death? So what is the smuggler selling? Hope. African youth should remain in Africa because they want to, because there is hope, not because they're blocked from going anywhere else. The second thing is that when we talk about migration, we need to talk about youth rights. And now we have all the instruments at the UN level, at the AU level, at the African Union level. We have the Youth 2030, we have the African Youth Charters. We have obligations of countries to respect youth rights. And when we talk about youth, it's not middle class, elite youth who already have access to education, to internet, to passport, to citizenship. We're talking about layers of marginalization, where the person can be young, female, stateless, and with disability all at the same time. What is the fate of this young person on the border and in displacement? The third thing is that as leaders here, we have on our shoulders the lives of millions and millions of African youth. This is a matter of survival for African youth every single day. And sometimes language is violence as well. So when young people subscribe to violence, is also to draw your attention. The message of the millennials is that it's either we live with dignity or die. So what is also the global commitment? When we have responsibility sharing, when we have the global compact, what is the responsibility sharing towards a continent that is the host of the largest migrant population and the largest refugee population and displaced population? My question is that to the panel, what is your personal commitment or the commitment on behalf of your institution when you leave Tana Forum to do for a young refugee, displaced, or stateless? Thank you.
Thank you very much. You have heard what the youth would ask frequently from now on. Representing the African Union, we have heard a very eloquent speaker. Now I'll give the chance to Dr. Mahari over there.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and thank you for the panelists and the other speakers. I just have 2 points for the panelists and others to reflect. The first one is the human rights of migrants in general. We all know that it's a scar on humanity what is happening in many places. In the Middle East, the human rights, on the sea, in Libya, there are a lot of black holes in terms of international law where militants and militias are arresting people and doing whatever they want on another human being. How do we respond this one in terms of international solidarity? That's the first thing, human rights of human beings, basically, beyond the governance issue of migration and others. The second is fundamentally, especially when we go to migration, irregular migration, the issue is a fundamental economic question. It's the gap between aspired living standard of the youth in Africa and the actual, in reality, living standard, the actual living standard they have. This gap between aspired living standard that they see in other continents, in other countries in Africa, for example, South Africa, so, and the actual reality and living standard, the gap is big. This is fundamental economic issue. How is the international community ready to respond to this one?
especially international organizations and from those countries of destination, beyond. And the poorest doesn't migrate the farthest. It's the one which has some income to cover these routes that are very expensive. And as such, in Africa, most countries do not have a clear direction on how they want to govern migration. They think if you undo poverty, if you reduce poverty, you'll undo migration, which is not evidence-based, it's ideologically based. This position is ideologically based. How do you think we should change this kind of position that is ideologically to evidence-based policies? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have heard these three interventions, and I would want the panelists to link this to the second framework that we have put. That is, how do we tackle the challenges of illegal migration, and how do we harness the positive aspect of movement of people? To sum up the three questions, just as a reminder from the floor, the ambassador of Mexico asked how to build in the Marrakesh outcome, which is the global compact, into the system of the continent. The three very interesting comments mentioned from the youth representative has wound up in a way that well, it's a very difficult question posed to the panelists. What commitment will they make when they leave from this hall to support, to manage the youth question in terms of the challenge that they face in migration? The last point mentioned by Dr. Mahari is also very interesting. The first one is, how do we respect the human rights of migrants? I think it has been dwelt very well in the Marrakesh global compact, where transiting countries could manage a number of the aspects, and the rights of immigrants need to be considered in terms of managing this challenge. But also, another question mentioned is the aspiration. The issue of migration, is it really a challenge coming from politics, economics, climate change, or it's an issue of aspiration? This is another issue that the audience would like you to respond to. But before that, I would like to give the floor to Maureen to comment in any of the points she's interested in. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Excellency, Madam Moderator, for giving me the chance to weigh in. I think despite the fact of having presided over a panel, it has to be said they did a really good job of highlighting many of the key issues. I just have three points to make. One is that the migration dynamics we're witnessing in this region, in the Horn of Africa region, are, as migration dynamics everywhere, influenced by push and pull factors. But they're somewhat exacerbated by the fact that this is the least integrated of all the regions in the continent. The IGAD, Regional Economic Community, is the least integrated of all the other RECs on the continent. And that plays a factor in how the migration unfolds. A lot of the migration from this region or through all three migratory routes takes place in an irregular rather than regular manner, leading to a lot of the vulnerabilities that we have heard about. But I don't want to make it sound like it's all doom and gloom. I think IGAD is also, it has to be said, one of the most progressive RECs on the continent in terms of migration policies and frameworks that it has put in place, a lot of the time in direct relation to continental body decisions. So IGAD has been at the forefront of giving effect to African Union decisions, calling for national migration policies and national coordination mechanisms on migration to ensure that migration is approached through whole of government approaches rather than through the silos that often characterize how migration is managed. Second point I would like to make is that arguments have been put forward in some quarters against free movement, given the likely security implications of free movement. And here I would like to refer to the African Union deliberations on this in the context of the Peace and Security Council, resulting in a CISA statement which notes that whereas there are potential security risks to freer movement, weighing the costs versus the benefits, the CISA as a body and the African Union believe that the benefits of freer movement by far outweigh any potential or real security impediments. And here I should also add that for the most part, the good bona fide migrants are unable to move. It's the bad guys who are able to transcend barriers to movement. So the security arguments should not hold IGAD back in continuing along this trajectory that it's on towards freer movement in the IGAD region. Just to cite an example, an Ethiopian national needs a visa to get to Djibouti, and a single entry visa to Djibouti costs something to the tune of $80. That is a huge, huge impediment to integration within the region, let alone continental integration. And we shouldn't just be guided by the fears around migration, that migration will bring with it more insecurity. We should also be guided by the evidence that there is out there on the potential benefits of free movement. And here I would like to point to the African Development Bank study, which notes that Africa's development fortunes, economic fortunes, would be greatly positively impacted if there was to be freer movement than currently exists. Last point I would want to make is that the recent developments in the Horn of Africa region, especially the rapprochement between Ethiopia and Eritrea, have created a climate that could lead this region towards a process akin to the Colombo process. I like to call it the Addis Ababa process, even though we're not quite there yet, that would bring together countries in the Horn of Africa region that are important labor-sending countries to the GCC to come together and organize together and dialogue together to ensure that the rights of their citizens in the Middle East are respected. This is something that we have seen work very well in Asia, for Asian-sending countries who have grouped together to ensure that their bargaining power with countries of destination in the Middle East are enhanced. I have confidence that, again, given recent developments in this region, we're getting closer to a point where countries like Ethiopia can begin to come together with other countries in the region to enhance their negotiation power vis-a-vis destination countries. Perhaps last point in reaction to what Dr. Mehari said about how we respond to the fact that there will be countries that continue to attract migrants because of their higher economic power. My response to this would be that there will always be disparities between countries. We have to find a way of ensuring that there are legal channels through which those opportunities can be addressed, because we know that when governments refuse to acknowledge the need for migrant labor, it's the people smugglers and the human traffickers that step in to facilitate that flow rather than the government. So we need for governments to acknowledge where there is need for migrant labor, because if they do not, it's the smugglers and the traffickers that will step in to perform that role, and I think that would be unfortunate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maureen. Now we'll back the floor to the panelists by way of responding to the questions or comments. I would like you to also wrap up your views in 2 minutes each. Thank you very much. I'll start out with State Minister Zeynu.
Thank you very much. I will focus mainly on the global responsibility and burden sharing principle, which is very vital, raised by one of our sisters. So with regard to this issue, if you see, be it the Global Compact for Refugee or Global Compact for Immigration, most part of the documents are very thick, except the responsibility sharing part, which is very slim. So this seems that the global community failed to understand that we are sharing both the dangers and the benefits of this global issue. And at the same time, there are a lot of commitments, declarations, agreements, including the famous Valletta Agreement between Europe and Africa. There are 5 pillars, especially in the Valletta Agreement. One of the pillars is to facilitate the orderly and regular migration through research, education, and so on and so forth. This has, when you see the implementation rate of this, it is very slow. So this shows that our commitment to share responsibility in tackling the problem is very slow. So if we don't enhance our cooperation in this regard, definitely we would have the problem in the foreseeable future. With regard to the youth aspiration and other questions that has been raised, these are definitely problems, as I mentioned earlier, problems of development. If the entire irregular migration issue is fully aligned with the issue of development definitely will not manage the problems of the irregular migration. It should be in line with eradication of poverty. It should be in line with enhancing the service quality. It should be in line with the development of the border areas and the border people who are seriously marginalized for years and years. So all these are issues of development, and so if the issues of development addressed in a joint venture, global, using the responsibility sharing principles, definitely we can have a means to tackle the problems of irregular migration and capture the aspiration of the youth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ato Zeynu. I will give the floor to Ambassador Aasland.
Thank you. To what was said by Youth Envoy Ayachebi and Dr. Mahari, yes, it is a scar on humanity, and it's not only a scar on humanity today and this year, but it has been for a long time. But I think it's important to keep in mind that a lot of effort is being done, notably by the IOM, by the UNHCR, a lot of financing by the European Union, and by the African Union also. The issue of how to effectively meet and reduce and try to eliminate the human suffering involved is, frankly, a very complex one. And the answer is sort of a multifaceted answer. Many things have to be done at the same time, and some of those things are being done at the same time. One is, as was referred to, the basically social and economic development and opportunities in countries that are the source of irregular migration or forced displacement. Another important thing is assistance, counseling, support on the way, and humanitarian and human aid to those that either attempt to cross the Sahel or the Sahara or the Mediterranean. Thirdly, evacuation from Libya. There has been a very large ongoing effort to get people out of absolutely unacceptable camps in Libya. So just to say, I think what everybody involved in these issues recognize that the problems are incredibly complex, but something is being done, and that has to be continued and deepened. I want to add one more thing, if I may, and it seems to me that the African Union and the Economic Commission for Africa and African countries are doing now, at the same time, at least 3 things to answer to these very important challenges. The first is what Maureen again referred to, which is the free trade area and the very important protocol on free movement, which will, at least in the longer term, increase opportunities and development and growth in the countries on the continent. Secondly, and also very important, is that the African Union has established the situation of refugees and IDPs as the theme of the year for this year. That is addressing an absolutely key issue in incentivizing countries to sign up and ratify the protocols and basically developing all kinds of action to alleviate the situation of the very significant number of refugees and IDPs on the continent. And I would like to mention what Ethiopia, of course, is doing in particular with the out-of-camp policy, and the changes in the legal framework are very pioneering and important examples for that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now we hear from Dr. Ashraf.
Fixing African fixing African borders should be part of the solution to irregular migration issues and to countering human smuggling and human trafficking in the Horn and beyond. As it is now, it is not. Africa has a total of 109 international boundaries covering 28,000 miles. 25% of them are demarcated, the rest are not, and they are protected by a total of 350 international border crossing points. That means 1 for every 80 miles. And then you can see that African borders are easily penetratable and often by the wrong elements, human traffickers, smugglers, drug dealers, and the like. So this is where we need to start, and we need also to recognize that we need to take back migration from the black market, because that is what it is now. There is a black market for migration, and we need to put migration back on a development path. And to do so, we need to fix the structural issues that are affecting borders. They are counterproductive to the free mobility of people, to a large extent, and to some extent to that of goods and capital. So we need to do some work around that. The Africa Free Trade Area Agreement is pointing us to that direction. We need also to look at the issue of developing holistic strategies. Migration so far and by large is used as a survival strategy in many ways, to natural calamities, to conflicts, and etc. I think we have a good opportunity now, since migration is embedded into the SDGs. There is a specific target that commit member states to work and facilitate regular orderly migration. And they are also another tool, which is the GCM, that is available to us. And we can use these tools so that we can make migration an opportunity for development, but also a climate change adaptation strategy, so that people will not just run, but people will have the possibility, to do things in a different way. I think it is also important that we use the existing mobility frameworks, continental, but also regional, on the free movement of people, so that they create within them an inclusive space for dialogue. The minister here spoke about the dialogue that Ethiopia had with neighboring countries. I know that in this region we have the regional committee on migration that involves countries in the Horn and Yemen. It has been going on since 2008. And also we have the IGAD, regional consultative process. So all these, platforms that exist regionally, continentally available and could be put to good use. I will just delve and reflect quickly on the questions that have been mentioned. I think on the GCM, it broke really a new ground for international cooperation on migration. Migration has been for so long a monopoly of law enforcement agencies, and now with the adoption of the compact, there is a possibility to engage the development cooperation and address migration, not by putting more walls and patrolling the seas, but also by addressing the drivers of migration. Many of them has to do with the development, lack of it, the livelihood issues, and the largely poverty that affects many of the countries. Horn is also a case in point to many of the issues of the equality between the center and the regions and among the different countries. So the equality is also one key driver of migration that needs to be addressed. It is no coincidence that migration has been put as target 10.7. Target 10 is about equality globally, addressing equality, and that is why migration is recorded squarely within that. I would like to take this opportunity to really applaud the lead of Mexico and Switzerland, the ambassadors of these both countries for over a period of 2 years have been working with member states to get us to a point where the compact was adopted in Marrakesh in December. I think in Africa in particular, we take real pride that the first ever migration agreed document has been adopted on an African soil. So I want to make that point. And I think from there, the UN has a possibility, A, to support member states in the implementation of the compact and mainstreaming it to migration development frameworks. B, we now need to work at the regional level because most of the migration is happening at the regional level, and bringing migration in that context would harness the integration potential that each and every region has. I just want also to add a little bit on the issue of youth. I think that is an important issue. And I think starting with a positive reflection to say that the youth are not just a source of hope, but they are the future of our countries, future for this region, and in many ways the future of our planet. Looking at this region, and maybe I put it in the wider context of Africa, 200 million people is the estimated number of youth between the age of 15 and 24. So this number is actually expected to double because Africa population is set to increase from 1.3 to 2 billion by 250. And then there's clear issues about the livelihoods, the employability for the youth. And if we go by the current levels that we see in terms of job creation, we would need maybe 18 million new jobs every year so that we can make enough for when we get to that point. The UN has already strategy 2030 for youth. IOM and other organizations are contributing to that. The African Union also has a role to play. So the commitment that I can make here is to really empower the youth. I think this is what we need to give to the youth. We should have trust and confidence in them, and the only thing that we need to do is really to empower them and have confidence in them. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Now I'll give the last chance to Professor Abdelwahab.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start by taking the challenge of the young lady over there. I think I'm privileged to be working at an institution which for the past 3 years has been generously offering scholarships for refugees from Yemen, from Syria, from Gaza, from South Sudan, and many other places. We offer them full scholarships, and then we help them. Most of them found employment. So we'll continue that, and I promise her if she has some people to send them my way. And then, but the most important, I think, thing about forced immigration is for it to not exist. I think it is really irrational for us to watch, for example, rulers or warlords or even states like Russia and Iran, for example, bomb 7 million Syrians out of their homes. And then we ask the other community, the international community, to pick up the pieces. The first thing is for this not to happen. Why should people just be thrown out from their homes? I think this is the most important thing. And there's a responsibility on the international community not only not to tolerate, but also not to fund governments which torture people, stifle hope for the young, do not allow them any work opportunities so that they would be leave. But I think the most important thing I would like to end up with is the link of migration to integration. I think we are lucky in this region in that we don't have the problems which the European Union have about the securitization of immigration and Brexit and the fear of other people. As I said earlier, the people in this region do not feel themselves as strangers. They don't look at others as strangers, and their identities sometimes mixed. But I think there are other problems which lead to this. And part of them is not well-managed integration. In the mid-1990s, we were very optimistic in this region, and I was one of a group tasked by the late Zeynu, who is greatly missed, to work on an initiative to emulate the Arias plan in Central America in this region. And of course, we were full of hope and worked on it, and then we had the problem which happened. And I was asked to study, I did a study about why, for example, the Eritrean Ethiopian integration went into disaster. And one of my disturbing discoveries is that the integration itself was the problem here, because it was not merged. We have a situation where the responsibility, the political responsibility for economic outputs is on the state, not on IGAD or even in EU, on the EU. People, when in Britain the economy or in Greece things go bad, it's the government which is responsible. Now the Eritrean case, Ethiopian case, the issue was that the unified currency and the customs union and all this unity, which was very good, was becoming a problem of tension, because there was differences about the rate of exchange in the single currency. There was difference about who was selling what for what, the prices of the currency. There was differences about which goods can be allowed to be bought. And in the end, this led to a clash. So we have also to manage integration in a way which, and the East African Union also disintegrated in a similar way, of quarrels about who benefits from the integration benefits. I mean, how do you distribute them fairly? And I think this is an issue that has to be looked at and studied and be careful about, because every integration gets benefits, but these benefits sometimes go to one side and not to the others. It's the same as in the States. So we have to really think about this very carefully and try to work forward from there.
Thank you very much, Professor Abdelwahab. Now we have come to our conclusions. I would want to take a lot of time to summarize, but I would want to reiterate what has been said around. I think we started out by saying that migration is something that is very much related to humanity. We have said that the definition is not yet very clear, but it's something that wouldn't have been complete if we haven't discussed it today, because it's a very important issue of economic development, addressing social issues, and also it has become an issue of security. So the Horn of Africa discussion has benefited by including the refugee issue in its discourse. Three big summaries that I wanted to mention here is that the first thing, we have been saying this many times, but unless we address the root causes, there's no way that we can mitigate the adverse effects of forced migration. The second point is that we are challenged in this day and age with the news. Some of the discussants were saying about aspirations. And these aspirations might not necessarily be true aspirations. They could be manipulated. So this is another challenge that we are facing. But truly, as has been said, we have also opportunities here with the upcoming inauguration of the free trade area of the continent, and then also the encouraging signs of movement of people, which would harness the dividends within our continent in creating jobs and in creating opportunities. So without further ado, these are the 3 points I would want to mention. Please give a round of applause to our panelists, and thank you very much.